Ella Favela, and I'm back with another episode of M.M.0.S stories, the channel where we get creative, caffeinated, and creepy. Let's talk all things horror, all things true crime, and maybe paint a picture together? Sound good? Cool. Pull up a chair. If you're new here, welcome. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you don't miss any of my future uploads. And if you've already done that, I just want to thank you sincerely from the bottom of my heart. I am completely overwhelmed by the amount of support, and I know we're just getting started. You guys are awesome, and I appreciate you so much. I also wanted to let you all know that I am constantly posting giveaways and contests over on my social media, so all my links are up on the screen right now. You can also find them in the video description. So right now, the 100th follower on my Instagram and the 200th subscriber to this YouTube channel will each win a free painting. If that sounds good to you, you know exactly what to do. Mosey on over to my social media, subscribe, follow, like, share, comment, and you will constantly be in the running for free art from yours truly. Let's digress. All right, without further ado, let's get into it, because this is one of my favorite topics. Today, we're discussing my theory that surviving abuse is a liminal space. Let's get into it. One thing about me is that I absolutely love horror. Always have. And I thank both my natal 8th house Scorpio moon and my late father for that. I think it started when my dad introduced me to the Twilight Zone, but particularly the episode Time Enough at Last. So if you haven't seen it, in that episode, the protagonist, who's just a normal, overworked, tired, stressed out dude in his 30s, he just wants enough time at the end of the day to be left over for him to sit and enjoy a book, which is a struggle that I personally resonate with. So anyway, eventually, without giving you too many spoilers, he finds himself to be the last man on Earth. And he revels for a second in having, and I quote, time enough at last to sit and read as many books as his heart desires. That is, till his glasses fall off his face and they shatter. Just a cruel twist of fate, which absolutely terrified me as a child. Like, terrified me. And to be honest with you, still does as an adult. If you don't know me in person, you might not know that I am incredibly visually impaired. Like, incredibly visually impaired. I've had multiple surgeries on my right eye. I wore an eye patch throughout elementary school, and to this day, without my glasses, the honest-to-God truth is I likely wouldn't survive very long in the apocalypse. So prior to that episode, the notion of being helpless and alone in the world in that capacity, I don't think it had ever crossed my 8-year-old mind. While I've consumed
thousands of other pieces of horror media over the years,
the only other one that's ever hit me in the same place since that fateful Rod Serling afternoon was the wormhole of unsettling but weirdly familiar images that accompanied the simple but brilliantly written creepypasta that I stumbled upon one evening around 2019. I couldn't get enough of these images, these nostalgic, sparse, abandoned places that made me feel equal parts understood and also pretty uncomfortable. The more I scrolled through photos, and the more I thought about the idea of no-clipping from reality into an endless maze of backrooms, stairwells, empty, transitional, situational places, the more I became confused as to whether I was creeped out or comforted by the whole thing. At this point, it was about Christmas 2019, and I was deep into the 5th serious, ultimately failed attempt I would make to leave my ex for good. Online horror had become my favorite means of escapism. I'd come back to the back rooms and horror and ARG subreddits late at night when the abuse was really bad and I couldn't sleep. I kept trying to scare myself with stories that were worse than my reality to keep my mind off of things. I remember coming back to these cursed images of empty spaces and being completely unable to shake the feeling that I'd been there before, I think. And the images, while creepy, they made me feel nostalgic, like maybe I'd belong there at some point. Liminal comes from the Latin word limen, meaning threshold. Liminal space is the place a person is in during a transitional period. It's a gap and can be physical, like a doorway, emotional, like a breakup, or metaphorical, like a big decision. This is the exact concept behind both Time Enough at Last and The Backrooms, as well as innumerable other works of fiction throughout history. It's remarkably effective because even if we haven't actually been to the abandoned shopping mall in the picture or accidentally wandered outside the coded framework of this simulation we call life, we all know the feeling of unease that comes with metamorphosis. Circling back to early 2020, a few months after I fell down the Backrooms wormhole, I started to realize that most people I knew didn't find the idea of liminal space anything but uncomfortable, and I was starting to feel like maybe something was wrong with me for finding a bit of solace in the discomfort. It wasn't until much later that year, a few months after I had left my ex and moved into my own apartment, that it all clicked one day. I think the reason I've always been drawn so deeply to horror is because it helps me not only to contextualize, but to regain some sense of control over the trauma that I've experienced and the traumatic responses that I live with as a result. It's easy to feel at home in a haunted house when your home is actually a violent place. I ain't afraid of no ghosts, but I am terrified of what some people have showed me they're capable of doing. Liminal spaces are uncomfortable and familiar and weirdly inviting to me because, in a lot of ways, I've been living in them my whole life. Abuse is a liminal space. I've always made a home for myself in spaces where other people normally pass by without a second thought, if even a glance at all. I've always felt completely at peace, alone with my own company, away from where I can bother anyone else. By the same token, looking back, there is some beautiful irony in realizing that from where I sit, I no longer feel that I'm in a transitional period in my life, or that I'm inhabiting spaces I shouldn't be on my own. However, my experience of abuse, including my experiences as a survivor of and advocate against it, exist on that liminal plane still, and I think they always will, to be honest. What I mean to say is, the stigma, blame, shame, hatred, isolation, and vitriol that myself and all other women who've survived domestic abuse encounter only serve to keep us locked away in the proverbial backrooms. From the abuse we survive at the hands of our partners, the way that the legal and justice systems and social services and medical professionals and our friends and families and neighbors and strangers on the internet at all make us feel like it was our fault, like we deserved it, like we asked for it or wanted it. Between it all, we lose sight of the problem. Somehow, the ones who need to be seen, heard, trusted, and protected the most, they end up being failed by society, time and time again. Liminal spaces are often associated with feelings of disease, discomfort, anxiety, confusion, because we don't know what's going to happen next or what awaits us on the other side. We don't know if we're going forwards or backwards. We don't know which way is up or where the exit is. We don't know if we're in danger, and there seems to be nobody around to ask, no matter where you go. This is exactly how it feels to be in an abusive relationship. You exist in the space between life and death, love and hate, reality and absurd fantasy. Life starts to feel like a glitched out video game where you hear the final boss theme music constantly, but that boss never appears. Domestic abuse is when somebody hurts, controls, manipulates, or terrorizes their partner or family member. It can be physical, sexual, emotional, financial, or neglectful, and is done as a means of having power over a victim. Domestic abuse is reported by 1/3 of women. However, it's estimated that globally, 50%, 1 out of every 2 women, will experience at least one serious instance of it in their lifetimes. With that being said, it still exists in the shadows, beneath a cloak of deeply entrenched guilt, shame, and the fear of repercussions should victims come forward. My last abusive relationship went on for 5 years, a half-decade of details I won't get into today because they hurt too much to remember. What I will say is this. It was hell on earth, a nightmare I couldn't seem to wake from. And the worst part was I genuinely didn't know how to get out. I didn't know if I deserved to get out, and I honestly don't know that I would have if it weren't for the constant support of a few of my friends. Right around this time, I vividly remember texting one of my dearest friends, let's call them S, in the middle of the night after a nasty fight with my ex. S lives abroad and was usually awake late at night when my insomnia or fights or whatever with my ex would keep me up. They became my lifeline and my escape in a lot of ways. They grew up witnessing domestic violence as a child, and as such, they've always been able to hold space for me as I started to disclose to them what I was living through. This was a welcome anchor for me as I floated through the ether of my fear. During those 5 years with my ex, I became incredibly socially withdrawn. Slowly, I lost touch with all of my friends who either didn't know what was happening behind closed doors or who couldn't understand why I wouldn't just leave him. It felt like I had practically no one to talk to, no one to confide in, and no one who understood me. Compounding my feeling of helplessness was the fact that at this point, I was in the middle of making my 5th attempt to leave, but it would ultimately take me 9 attempts to get away from him for good. That's definitely more than the average of 7 that most women usually need to leave their abuser. 9 attempts. 9 times that I tried to break free from his grasp, only to be pulled back in with love bombing and lies, threats, apologies, promises. 9 times I faced the consequences of his anger, violence, and revenge. 9 times I had to start over emotionally, mentally, and financially from scratch with nothing but the hope and the brute force of my willpower. It was exhausting. It was lonely. It was terrifying. But I digress. Let me paint you a picture. It's the middle of the night, in the middle of the bitter winter, sometime during 2019, and I'm filling S in on the details of the evening. There's new holes in my walls, and I've heard some creative new insults. New threats have been made on my life, and I'm sporting a fat lip, but I keep trying to steer the conversation back towards our usual canon fodder. Sci-fi, hip-hop, comic books, but S isn't having it. They pick up on my sadness and the fear in my text messages, and out of the blue, I get the following text. I feel like you're in shitty deep space right now. I was super confused, but S explained. You know how in sci-fi there's always that scene where the hero is stuck in deep space with a broken ship and no way to communicate? And then they have to deal with like danger and obstacles and asteroid belts and like xenomorphs and the Lochnar and enemy ships and stuff like that? Yeah. And they still have to find a way to fix their ship and send a distress signal and find safe passage to a friendly planet. So I agreed, like, naturally I know those scenes, but I couldn't see the correlation. Well, S continued, that's how I see you right now. You're stuck in shitty deep space with a broken ship, no comms, and alien forces creeping up on you fast. You gotta find a way out of there, friend, before it's too late. At first I laughed at this. It was so absurd and so creative and also so accurate. From there, the tradition of shitty deep space was born. I really gotta thank S for this because it really helped me navigate this experience while maintaining both a sense of humor and a notion of detachment from my abuse, both of which I feel were ultimately instrumental in my ability to finally leave. While some might call it a maladaptive coping strategy or a form of disassociation, both of which are fair, I am much more inclined to call it a tool looking back. Halfway through writing about the backrooms, it dawned on me that outer space is the ultimate liminal space, and that, once again, I'd been using horror as a mechanism to reframe the abuse I was experiencing into something that I could contextualize and subsequently continue to move through. It was easier for me to show up every day once I had an outlet. I'd message us throughout the day about my shitty deep space adventures and about how the Kessel Run went sideways and how I was stuck on a hostile alien planet, about how I was deep undercover, and about how my alien captor wanted to enslave me, or worse. Eventually, we fabricated a whole plot where my daily mission was to hide my true intentions from the alien overlord and to defeat the rogue androids, the wormholes, the black holes, the supernovas that would fall in my path. When I was able to check my text messages, ground control was always there to remind me to keep my wits about me, to use my skills, and to believe that the universe would provide me a way out. S would throw me a bone in the narrative on the particularly hard days, a friendly passing ship, a habitable planet within a few parsecs. And eventually, that hope started to transfer into my reality. I mean, look, once you start seeing your abuser as a Vogon,
it becomes infinitely easier to take them less seriously.
Over time, my headcanon became a constant part of my life, and I look back on that with infinite fondness. As I continued to collect attempts to leave my abuser, I continued to build upon the universe that S and I shared, and eventually, these strangest things started to happen. Eventually, the stories of enduring the alien overlords morphed into tales of escaping the Vogon home planet and returning to Pycon to live in peace and play Pyramid and paint for the rest of my days. Eventually, the stories became about safety, happiness, survival, freedom, and reunion. I waxed poetic with S about seeing my friends and family again, about living my passions and getting past the survival mission. Eventually, my headcanon became something hopeful, and as I moved towards my final attempt to leave, the thoughts I had about my own life became, very cautiously, a little more optimistic too. In my last video, I spoke a little more extensively about the realities I faced during that 9th and final attempt to leave. And if you haven't had a chance to watch it yet, I'll leave a link to it in the description down below. Go check it out after this one. It was one of the most grueling experiences of my life, but for the grace of my friends and some truly unfathomable luck on my part, I can say with pride that on July 15th, 2020, my shitty deep space mission would finally come to an end. After half a decade, lost in the unrelenting beyond, I finally managed to escape. In space, nobody can hear you scream, but back here on Earth, it feels like a mission much greater than myself to speak up as frequently, consistently, and meaningfully as I can about my experiences out there in shitty deep space. In fact, that's why I felt compelled to write this script. I wanted to share this with you today because I know that there are millions of other people who currently feel like they're stuck in deep space or in the backrooms or no-clipped in some unfinished level of a video game. And I also know that while society is very well aware of this fact, it remains hesitant as a whole to address it. It isn't easy to be open and vulnerable about the darkest, most guilt and shame-ridden pieces of my life. However, I owe it to anyone who still feels lost in the liminal void to shine a light in that darkness. If you are currently experiencing domestic abuse, I want you to know first and foremost that your experience is valid. You are not alone. You're not crazy. You're not hopeless. There is a way forward. There is a way out. You can survive. You can thrive. There's a beautiful life after abuse. Look, I'm not saying that life is perfect now. In fact, it's far from it. And so am I. And that's okay. I've got a lot of trauma. I've survived a lot of things. I carry a lot of scars, physical and otherwise. I've got issues I deal with daily as a result of traumatic brain injuries from being beaten. There's parts of my body that'll never be the same. I struggle with trust, intimacy, boundaries, self-esteem. I still have nightmares, flashbacks, panic attacks. Some of my triggers are absolutely ridiculous. In short, I'm a handful. But I am an incredibly blessed handful. My boyfriend's been one of my best friends for almost half my life, and he's provided me with a safe and stable place to land. It's a soft place. I can relearn trust, love, and intimacy. I'm so grateful to have him in my life and for his endless ability to make my life a sweeter place to be. I don't make it easy on him, and I can only hope one day to repay a fraction of his kindness. Truth be told, I was a mess when I first moved here, and even after knowing him as long as I have, to this day, I still have to slay my own self-doubt dragons from time to time. Love is truly the most powerful force on this planet, and you can't tell me otherwise. It's important to me that anybody watching this knows that even after everything, I very much believe in romance and in love, and that I'm sincerely not angry at men as a whole. I'm mad at the people, men and women, that have abused me over the course of my life. Part of truly healing for me has been learning how to separate the problem from the whole. And as a lifelong student of feminism, it remains integral to my being not to confuse misandry for feminism. My boyfriend and all of my male friends, they are truly spectacular humans. They've gone above and beyond for me every step of the way. Therefore, it would be disingenuous of me to paint them with the all men stereotype, or even to buy into it in the first place. This tangent is best fully saved for another day. However, it was really important to me to make that very clear. After any prolonged period of isolation and survival, it's bound to be somewhat difficult for you to find normal again. A great example of this that falls right in line with today's liminal space theme is when a deep-sea diver has to very slowly reascend to avoid decompression sickness, or the bends. The bends refers to the potentially fatal consequences of inert gases, including nitrogen and helium, bubbling in a diver's blood should they try to reascend too quickly. Healing after abuse is like coming back to the surface after having been a saturation diver underwater for weeks on end. You really just want to come back up to the surface, but you have to honor the process, or it will catch up to you. There's no shame in your process or in how long any of it takes you. There's no shame in calling the police. There's no negative moral judgments to be made on you for taking the steps you need to take to leave your abuser safely. If you or a loved one are currently experiencing domestic abuse, please, I encourage you to take some time to consider the resources I've linked in the description. In addition to the physical list that you can reach out to directly for support, I have a free safety planning guide and a ton of short-form content that you can access directly through my Linktree, which is also in the description below. I am constantly updating my lists and my resources, so please reach out in the comments or send me an email if you think I should be made aware of anything else that might be useful to anyone watching this. I personally learned so much through social media while I was getting ready to leave, and I am so genuinely grateful that I'm here today, and that I'm even able to share my story with you. Liminal space is so effective to me as a concept because of the fear of what we aren't yet aware of, what might lurk around the corner or be hiding in the depths or the shadows just out of our line of sight. However, as I said earlier, that eerie feeling has always pulled me towards it with equal parts excitement and trepidation. As I move through my adult life, I want to reach back through time and hug the little girl who always felt the most at home when her family was fast asleep. The girl who would sit in the family room alone in the dark, way past her bedtime, feeling like that was the only time that she was allowed and able to relax and just enjoy the space. I'd stay up late, watching Cara Thrace, Dana Scully, Ellen Ripley, Leia Organa, Sarah Connor, Catherine Janeway, Zoe Washburn, Laura Roslin, and Buffy Summers, just to name a very small few. I'd watch them and learn from them as they inspired me to be the hero I was waiting for in my own life story. They taught me that victories cannot be claimed unless you win the battle first. And to win the battle, you have to get your hands dirty. You have to get in there, and you have to accept that you might lose. Another piece of media which brings up some of these feelings when I think about my past and that liminal comfort of my parents' living room way past my bedtime comes from Wham City Comedy and Alan Resnick. They have a brilliant short called This House Has People in It. And I'll tell you, it brought up some deeply buried emotions the first time I watched it. I'll link that down below for anybody curious, and I highly recommend anything Wham City Comedy and Alan Resnick have ever touched. They're brilliant, they're nuanced, and they'll throw you down a wormhole. You've been warned. You're welcome. I digress. I am so grateful to my real life support system, to my boyfriend, my friends, my chosen family. Some days, however, I still have to work through my own survivor's guilt. It's hard to feel like I'm worthy of this much love, grace, and opportunity when I remember the things I had to fight through to get here. Healing is a long, non-linear, and very nuanced process. I'm still actively processing my own experience, releasing my own grief, and allowing myself to fall back in love with living again. It isn't easy. It's scary letting go. When you learn to trust that there is an ending to the liminal plane, eventually, you can find the exit door. Eventually, you walk out of the back rooms, you finish decompressing, and you re-enter the atmosphere. And eventually, you find your way home. Thank you for joining me today. I know we got a little bit weird and dark, however, I hope you also found some inspiration and humor in the shadows as well. If you enjoyed today's video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and if you'd like to hear more Memento stories, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified whenever I upload a new video. Tell me, would you rather be stuck in the back rooms or deep space? Do you think you'd survive? Why or why not? Write me a comment down below. Until next time, remember, you will die, but for now, live well.